What does it take to turn God against the people? Especially when those people are people that he, in a sense, staked his reputation on. People whom he had made promises to. Promises concerning. But in the process of blessing them, in the process of making them into a great people, in the process of trying to accomplish something with them, he had said, I'm doing this because of Abraham and what he had done, and because of promises that I made to him. What would it take, having called them, having made promises, having brought them out of Egypt, having established them in the land, having made commitment after commitment to them, having, as I say, put his own reputation on the line with them, what would it take to turn God against a people? That is the message of the prophet Ezekiel. And the sermon that we're going to go through today is the fourth in a series of sermons on the book of Ezekiel. If you haven't heard the ones previous to this, they are available on tape. Just simply call the tape department and ask for Ezekiel 1 through 3, and they'll send them along to you. In chapter 6, where we've come, it says, The word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, set your face toward the mountains of Israel and prophesy against them. And say, You mountains of Israel, hear the word of the Lord God. Thus saith the Lord God to the mountains and to the hills and to the rivers, to the valleys. Behold, I, even I, will bring a sword upon you, and I will destroy your high places. Now we come to a situation where God himself has said, I, even I. This isn't some delegated responsibility. This isn't something he's casting off. He is accepting full responsibility for what he is about to do. And he said, I am going to come in there and bring a sword upon you. And the first thing he says he's going to do, which maybe would give us a clue as to where they had gone wrong, is I'm going to destroy your high places. In our language, in 20th century English, that would probably read, I will destroy your sanctuaries. That is, your religious sanctuaries. I'm going to destroy all these religious institutions, all these religious edifices, buildings, monuments, sanctuaries, all these things that you have built that are religious. I am going to destroy. Why? Well, he says, your altars shall be desolate. Your images, and that word is not used a great deal in the Hebrew. It basically means sun pillars, or pillars to the sun, or sun images. He says, your sun images shall be broken, and I will cast down your slain men before your idols. Where? Before your idols. Does that give you a clue as to what it would take to turn God against the people? That in the process of bringing the sword upon the land, in the process of killing off their young men, where are their carcasses thrown? Before their idols. Now, would we conclude then that the corruption of their religion had anything at all to do with why God had turned against them? He said, I will lay the dead carcasses of the children of Israel before their idols. Repetitious. By the way, if you hadn't already realized it, prophecy is often cast in the form of poetry, and so you see these lines and rhythms that begin, and repeated phrases that occur again and again in Ezekiel, partly for emphasis, but partly because it is said in the poetic style. I will lay the dead carcasses of the children of Israel before their idols, and I will scatter your bones, where? Round about your altars. All these religious places, these sacrifice places, these places where you're going through all of your religious exercises. Your religion is at heart and core in all this. In all your dwelling places, the cities shall be laid waste. The high places, that is the sanctuaries, shall be desolate. All your churches, desolate. That your altars may be laid waste and made desolate. And your idols may be broken and cease. And your sun images cut down. And your works may be abolished. And the slain shall fall in the midst of you. And you will know that I am the Eternal. Actually, in Hebrew, you will know that I am Yahweh. I'm the one. I'm God. And you're going to know it. And you're going to know that I have done it. You're not going to be wandering around with bad luck. Or we happened to go out in a thunderstorm, or we built this model of ours, this sun image too high, and the lightning struck it. It's just one of those things that happened. He said, oh no. Oh no. You are going to know that I have done it. Now come to the next question. How is it possible for a people who knew God to unknow Him? How is it possible for people who were brought out of Egypt, who walked dry shod across the bottom of the Red Sea, who had seen the pillar of fire, who had seen the pillar of the cloud and the fire, all those people who had seen some of their fathers die in the wilderness, all those people who had been involved in all of the giving of the law and of Mount Sinai and of Moses going up the mountain, how is it possible that these people would simply turn around and walk away from the true God and say, I think that I will serve Baal instead of Yahweh? Have you ever sat and sort of pondered how that got done? How do you get from here to there? Here are people, as I said, who had seen miracles. And they go and change and worship a God from whom they have seen nothing. Nothing. The idols that they built, one of the prophets says, it never occurred to you. You know, you take this log out of the forest, you get out your hammer and your chisel, and you hack away and cut away, and you make yourself an idol, and you put the idol up, and you bow down, and you worship it, and it doesn't even cross your mind that the rest of this idol that you didn't use out of the log of wood, you burnt in the fire and warmed yourself with it. It didn't cross your mind that you could just as easily have burned the idol. It has no power. It can't walk. You have to carry it about from place to place. How do you get away from a God who can feed you manna in the wilderness, who can conquer your enemies ahead of you, who can bring the walls of Jericho down flat, to worshiping a God? You have to carry Him. They got there. How did they get there? Well, there is a clue. And I want you to turn back with me to Exodus, the 32nd chapter. Because we're right in the middle of this period of time where God has shown Him. People who are alive, who saw the crossing of the Red Sea, people who got their feet muddy as they walked across the bottom of the Red Sea, are still alive when the events described in Exodus 32 take place. In Exodus 32, Moses has gone up to the top of the mountain to receive the commandments from God. God is going to reveal to this people a way of life. He's going to show them the difference between right and wrong. He's going to make it clear to them what the right way of worship is. All these good things He's going to give to them. Well, in verse 1 of 32 it says, Exodus 32, they saw that Moses delayed to come down out of the mountain. So the people gathered themselves together unto Aaron. They said to him, Up, make us gods, which shall go before us. And as for this Moses, the man that brought us up from the land of Egypt, we don't know what has become of him. Now all of a sudden they are ready to make gods. Well, not really gods. After all, they are just representations of gods. You ask any Catholic about, the idols before whom they bow down, or the images, I should say, from their perspective. They bow down before an image of the Virgin Mary, or they bow down before a crucifix. The Catholics will tell you they know that this image is nothing. They are not worshiping the image. The image simply represents something to them in the way that a word represents something to us. We say the word crucifixion, or that we refer to the death of Christ. Well, they do it pictorially with an image on the wall. It is a form of language to them, is all it is. Well, you have to understand that that's no more than what's going on right here. It's a form of language. Look at what he said. Aaron said to them, okay, break off your golden earrings that are in the ears of your wives and your sons and your daughters, and bring them to me. All the people broke off the earrings that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. He received them at their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool, after he had made it, a molten calf. So just a simple image of a calf. Probably not that dissimilar to a cherubim, one of the faces of a cherub, as a matter of fact, had they ever seen one. But at the same time, it also was a representation of one of the gods of Egypt. He said, these are your gods, O Israel, which brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Notice, we are not abandoning our religious tradition. I am not asking you to ignore the God that brought you up out of the land of Egypt and begin to worship a god of the Zidonians or a god of the Mesopotamians or the god of the East who had nothing to do with bringing you out of the land of Egypt. No, no, no. This is the God that brought you out of the land of Egypt. This is a representation of the God that opened up the Red Sea. This is the replication of that God. Moses is the troublemaker, and this is what some of them were saying. Not God. Moses is the problem. As for Moses, we don't know what's become of him. Now this idol, this calf, is a representation of, it's not the real God, we all know that. It's a representation of the God that brought you out of the land of Egypt. When Aaron saw it, he built an altar before it and made a proclamation and said, tomorrow is a feast to Yahweh. Have you understood the significance of that? Tomorrow is a feast. That's a holy day, a holiday to Yahweh. He didn't say it was a holiday to the calf. He didn't say it was a holiday to the sun. He didn't say any of these things. He said it's a holiday to Yahweh. Do we understand? Do we begin to understand that the rituals that we all go through in December of every year are old, ancient, time-worn, honored by men from generations back, that go back at least this far? Sun worship, calf worship, but primarily sun worship, which Ezekiel is addressing, is all tied up. The December 25th, everybody knows, it's not Christ's birthday. It's the birthday of Sol Invictus, the birthday of the invincible sun. It had its origins in a Roman religion. Every historian, every religious historian knows that. It's not a bad thing that we do. It's just that, I remember, I'll never forget, when I was learning some of these things and I was coming out of the Baptist church, I had learned some things about Christmas in a Baptist publication, the Baptist Standard. It was all listed down there. And it was talking about all the pagan origins of Christmas. I said, good grief. Took it into a Baptist training union on Sunday night, and I read this in the adult class. And then I read out of Deuteronomy. It says, now when you go into the land, I don't want you to inquire of these other gods and say, now, how did these people worship their gods? I will do that to Yahweh, to my God. He said, don't do that. For every detestable thing that I hate have they done to their gods, and I don't want you doing that with me. Well, they did it anyway. But as I was going through the class, one of the fellows stuck up his hand. He said, look, I don't think of anything pagan in these connections. He said, when I see the green of the Christmas tree, I think of the new life that's ours in Jesus Christ. And when I see the star on the top of the Christmas tree, I don't think of some pagan star of Remphan or some other god like that. I think of the star that came and stood over the place where the young child lay. And when I see the snow around the bottom of the cotton of the Christmas tree, it's white, and I think of the purity of the Christian life and of Christ and of how we can be pure in Him. And he went through the whole rigmarole. He had in his mind a Christian symbolism upon every sex symbol, every sun image, and everything having to do with Nimrod and Semiramis worship that was existent in that Christmas tree. He had a Christian explanation for it. He had just changed the language. Do you think it's possible, when we read here in Ezekiel the 6th chapter about your sun images and all these things that you people have done, and he says, I'm going to lay your carcasses right in front of your sun pillars. Do you think it's possible that these people had sort of combined sun worship with Yahweh worship? And that they were doing these things in their minds to kind of honor Yahweh? Because, you see, they were doing it right inside the temple, we will learn. We will learn that they had brought some of these images. In fact, in Manasseh's reign it was done. He brought them in, and when he repented, he took them out again. Somehow they got back in there again, because when Josiah comes along, he's taking the Easter images, the Asherah, out of the temple one more time. They keep dragging this stuff in, and then the king will come along and drag it out again, because they know they don't belong there. Why did they put them there in the first place? Was it abandonment of God? You would think that if they were abandoning God's religion in their own minds to go to the worship of the sun god, that they would abandon the temple and go build a temple to the sun. Temples to the sun have been built throughout Latin America, South America, through Central America. I've seen some incredible ones that have been built down there. Temples to the sun were built throughout the Middle East. Why would they not walk away from the temple and go build a temple to the sun over here? I think that they would have probably had less trouble from God in one way had they done that. But they had to keep dragging it right into his house, which was called by his name, where he had promised Solomon that he would come and he would let his presence be there. And of course, the instant they brought an image into it, God was gone, if indeed he had not been gone before that. But you see, what they were doing came from the same precise roots that our society and our civilization do today, sun worship. And they thought, just like we do today, that you can take these pagan images and you can actually use them to worship God, and you can attach Christian symbolism to all these things, and it will be just fine. Because to be sure, I don't believe that these people in the beginning felt that they were evacuating Yahweh worship, that they were leaving the God of Abraham, that they were ignoring the God of Israel. I think they thought they could do these things to him. They could not. Now, the word why is the one that leaps to me when I read all this, and it's answered in verse 7. You're going to know that I am Yahweh. You're going to know who I am. You're going to know what I stand for. You're going to know what I want you to do. And really it boils down to knowing who God is the fundamental issue of all of the worship of idols, all the worship of God by the means that he commands, by the Sabbath, by the holy days, all of these things which he has given to worship him. All these things have to do with knowing who he is. And you don't know him if you go about his worship in another way. Where does it go? Well, it goes to the description that we read in Ezekiel, the 6th chapter, where he says, when it all comes down to it, I'm going to lay the carcasses of your slain children at the foot of your sun pillar. Put it in modern English. I'm going to lay your killed children right around the bottom of your Christmas trees. Let's see how you feel about those Christmas packages. Yet he says in verse 8, I will leave a remnant that you may have some that escape the sword. Oh, well, that's encouraging. Remember earlier that it said that as he divided up the people to the sword and famine, there was a few hairs that he took. He took his hair, shaved it off, divided it into thirds. He took a few of them and bound it up in his garment and protected it. We've often thought of the doctrine of the place of safety. That is, the idea that God's people was, of course, going to be collected, and a handful of people who were worth it, justified, righteous, or whatever particular standard it was, these people would be taken somewhere and protected. I will leave a remnant that you may have some that escape the sword among the nations when you are scattered through the countries. And they that escape of you shall remember me among the nations where they shall be carried captive. Now that doesn't fit the traditional idea of a place of safety, does it? Those that escape, the remnant that escapes, the remnant that are allowed to keep their lives, it's like Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You realize that those men were perfectly safe. They escaped with their lives, but where were they? They were in captivity. They were in Nebuchadnezzar's palace. They were given favor. They were protected. They were fed. They were clothed. And eventually, Daniel even came to great power. But they were not in some hidden place of safety where nobody knew where they were. It's interesting. He said, they that escape of them shall remember me among the nations where they are carried captives, because I am broken. Notice, what a word for God to use. I am broken with their whorish heart, which has departed from me, and with their eyes which go a-whoring after their idols. And they shall loathe themselves for the evils which they have committed in all their abominations. And they shall know that I am the Lord, that I am Yahweh, and that I have not said in vain that I would do this evil to them. Now, this is no idle threat. This isn't like saying, well, if you're a bad boy, Santa Claus isn't going to bring you anything. And, of course, parents often don't carry through on those threats. They threaten their children with all kinds of dire consequences that oftentimes are never carried out. God says, I don't want you to think that this is that kind of a threat. This is something that is certain to come upon you because of what you've done. So just make preparation for it. Just understand that it is going to happen. Thus saith the Lord God, smite with your hand and stamp with your foot and say, Alas, for all the evil abominations of the house of Israel. For they shall fall by the sword, and by famine, and by pestilence. He that is far off, well, he'll die by the pestilence. He that is near, he'll fall by the sword. He that remains and is besieged shall die by the famine. Thus will I accomplish my fury upon them. Words like this are not words that I am usually in a mood to ascribe to God. I don't like to think of God as angry. I don't like to think of God having fury. I don't like to think of God coming to the place where He says, I will have no pity. But these words are ascribed to Him. He says them. He says, the time is coming when I will pour out my fury. All I know is I want to be in a certain frame of mind. I want to be in a relationship with God. I do not want to be a person who's idolatrous at a time when God decides He's going to pour out His fury upon idolaters. Then you shall know that I am Yahweh, when their slain men shall be among their idols, all around about their altars, all about every high hill, in the tops of the mountains, under every green tree, under every thick oak. These are, by the way, religious symbols, every one of them. And the green trees and the thick oaks are all used as religious symbolism in some of these idolatrous worship. And the place where they do offer their sweet savor to all their idols. So will I stretch out my hand upon them and make the land desolate, and more desolate than the wilderness toward Diblath, which is absolute rank salt desert. It's going to be desolate. And they shall know that I am Yahweh. This is no game, This is not playing church. This is not just, some religious rigmarole that people do. This has to do with the living God and a response that is real. It's going to happen. Happened before, and it's going to happen again. We've said elsewhere, and I will be showing you further as we get way down into Ezekiel, how apt these prophecies are and how much they have to do with the end time, and how that the pattern that was followed by Israel and what happened to them is going to be repeated one more time. And God says, in modern language, it's going to happen to all your churches, all your sanctuaries, all your religious symbolisms, all of your green trees. Let's take a Christmas tree. Let's talk about your idol. Let's talk about your icons. Let's talk about your stained glass windows. And let's talk about your altar that says, in remembrance of me on it. Let's talk about all these things that you do, in which you have perverted the things that I have told you to do, and all of your customs and your practices. If I want to recognize people by the way they worship, when I come to your sanctuaries, all I see is Baal worship and Dagon worship and all the pagan symbols that have been there from time immemorial. I don't see people doing what I told them to do. And that's what He looks for. Chapter 7. Moreover, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Also, Son of man, thus saith the Lord God to the land of Israel, An end is come upon the four corners of the land. Now is the end come upon you, and I will send my anger upon you. I will judge you according to your ways. I will recompense upon you all your detestable things. Abominations is an old word. We don't use it much in our language anymore. Better translation nowadays is detestable things. Things that are detestable. Your actions are detestable if they are an abomination to God. Utterly detestable. My eye shall not spare you, neither will I have pity. I know what pity is. I feel pity sometimes toward a little child who is hurt. I feel pity toward small animals. I break for squirrels. Squirrels in the road, we come to a screeching halt and leave skid marks in the road. Wait for a little fellow to get off the road and out of the way. I have pity toward squirrels and dogs and children and cats and little things like that. God says the time's going to come when we are not going to receive from Him, that is, somebody isn't, the pity that you and I would accord to a squirrel that's crossing the road. I will recompense your ways upon you. Your detestable practices shall be in the midst of you, and you will know that I am Yahweh. Thus saith the Lord Yahweh, a disaster, a singular disaster. That's basically what this means when it says an evil and only evil. A disaster, a singular disaster is come. An end is come. The end is come. It watches for you. This is what imagery. The end is watching. Who's it watching for? It's watching for you people. He said, behold, it has come. The morning has come to you, O you that dwell in the land. You can't hide out in the dark anymore. You would hide. It's been nighttime, and you could hide. You could do all your detestable things out there in the dark. The morning has come to you. The time is come. The day of trouble is near, and not the echo of the mountain. You're not just hearing a rattling echo. You're hearing now the real thing. Now will I shortly pour out my fury upon you, and I will accomplish my anger upon you, and I will judge you according to your ways, and I will recompense you for all your detestable things. Now, regardless of whether a person believes that this was all over with Israel and Judah and of old, which I do not, or whether you believe it has to do yet with the end time, the pattern is here. That a people who are supposed to be worshiping God, called to worship God, who have been blessed by God, who have been given the truth by God, who actually have it in their hands and on the bookshelves of their homes and ought to know better than the things they do. These people, he said, these messages are for them. And in whatever generation, in whatever time, sooner or later, the chickens will come home to roost. He said, my eye will not spare. I will not have pity. I will recompense you according to your ways and your detestable things that are in the midst of you. And you will know that I am the Lord that smites. You know, this must have been shocking to anybody that heard Ezekiel's message, because he gave them a new name for God that they had never heard before. It was Yahweh Macha. Yahweh Macha, the Lord that smites. That is the eternal Yahweh who smites. God can love, and God can care, and God can feed, and God is merciful and gracious and compassionate, but God also will smite. He will hit you. Behold the day, behold it is come, morning is gone forth. The rod has blossomed, pride has budded. This is poetic language and a little curious. The commentators, when they come to this, seem to think that it's Babylon, which is the rod of the Assyrian. In another place it was called the rod in God's hands, the rod of God's anger with the Assyrian that God uses to chastise Israel. And a rod, symbolically, in biblical language, is often the rod of chastisement. But this isn't Nebuchadnezzar, and this isn't the Assyrian. Listen to the way it reads. He says, behold, the day, it is come. The morning is gone forth. The rod has blossomed. Pride has budded. Violence has grown up into a rod of wickedness. You realize what this is saying? Sure, the time has come in the past when Israel was chastised from without. Surely the Assyrian was the rod of God's anger. And at the time that these verses had been written, the Egyptians had been a rod of chastisement for the Jews long time before that, and the Babylonians had taken all these people captive years before. These prophecies are all dated, as a matter of fact, from the time that they went into captivity in the past. Nebuchadnezzar had been, indeed, a rod, but Nebuchadnezzar was an external rod that God used to chastise Judah. This isn't external. This rod is internal. Notice it says, the rod has blossomed, pride has budded, violence has grown up into a rod of wickedness. How shall I illustrate what must have happened to those people? The best illustration I can think of is what's going on right here, right now. Violence inside our country and among our people has grown up. It has blossomed. It has broken forth. It has become a rod of chastisement for our people, and it has only just started. It's only just begun. Just the other day in Tyler, it was a shocking thing. This man came into the television station there in Tyler, and before they knew it, he'd gone through a door that the public weren't supposed to go through, and he was back down a hallway, and he was talking to people. He wanted to be put on the air. He wanted to tell people something. Well, the security guys got hold of him and hustled him out the door and shoved him out in the street, and he was gone that quick. And so he got back in his car, and he drove down the road
to a medical clinic. I don't know why he went where he went. But he went inside, he took a woman there as hostage and held her at knife point, and he told them finally what he had done. He had killed his father. He was in the television station trying to tell them that he had killed his own father. He didn't know why he had done it. He was crazy. And of course we can say, well, there are crazy people in any generation, and that's true. We can say that the fact that one man kills his father is not particularly relevant, and that's true. But whenever you see it, and you see the car seat soaked, literally soaked in blood, where his father was lying while he was in the television station, while he was taking a hostage in the doctor's clinic, it sort of gets you down inside. Whenever you read in your paper, day after day, week after week, month after month, of violence on top of violence on top of violence, insane violence, mad violence, senseless violence, sometimes organized violence, sometimes provoked violence, sometimes systematic violence for the purpose of financial gain. The drug dealers in this country now are perpetrating violence at a rate never before seen in this country, or any other, for that matter. At this point in time, we are probably, apart from war, and in some cases you have to realize that there are no more people who have been killed in wars many times than we are killing week in, week out in this country. When you think about what's going on, the murders, there has never been in the history of mankind a more violent time than now, nor a more violent place than here. When we were walking at night, we carry mace on our belts. We're afraid. It's the only time we can walk, and we have to walk, so we walk at night. I carry a stick. My dog goes with us. Not that she'd be a whole lot of help, but at least she's there. I thought about carrying a gun, but I thought, no, I don't want to consider the consequences of what might happen if I was compelled to shoot a man away from the house. So we carry mace. This is becoming, and we live in a small town. We live in the country. And I'm afraid. And I have a burglar alarm, and I have an infrared detector, and I have a shotgun under the bed, and all these things. And, and I am suffering, in a sense, a chastisement from the violence that is endemic in our country today. And it's getting worse. I haven't brought the statistics. I don't really need them. Go get your own almanac and look them up. You all know that it is. It's one of those self-evident truths. You don't have to prove it to people. Everybody not only knows it, everybody feels it. And more you're coming into contact with people. It was not just a few days before that. I mean, you think you read about a murder in the newspaper, and it doesn't mean a lot to you. It doesn't mean a lot until it's somebody you knew. And here was a case where a young man who was the son of an acquaintance of ours, who was out painting the garage. He was up on a ladder painting away on the garage, and his car was sitting out the curb. The keys were in his pocket, and some young fellow wanted to steal that car. So he came up behind him, stabbed him in the back, yanked him down off the ladder, cut his throat. He didn't even know how to commit a murder because he didn't get the boy killed properly. He's still in the hospital right now in a coma, and will be there no way of knowing how long. He wasn't even good at what he did. But he smashed his head against the pavement until he was totally unconscious and caused probably irreversible brain damage, dragged him into the garage, covered him up with a tarp, and got his car keys and stole his car and left. That's what he was after in the first place. The day before, he had been released from Judge Tunnell's court in Tyler on probation for car theft. The day before. No one knows, but there was another murder in Tyler not that long ago where the body was found under a tarp with throat cut and multiple stab wounds. No one will ever know unless someone confesses. But the violence here struck someone we know, and so every day, you kind of call and you ask and you want to know, well, how's your boy? Is there any hope? Is there any sign of life? Well, yeah, he's a little better, but nowadays, when people are in a coma and you hear that they're getting better, oftentimes you brace yourself because I don't know about you, the number of times I've heard that they're getting better, it often seems to come just before they die. And of course, for this young man, getting better, he might have to die actually to get better, and it might be one of the better things that could happen to him. But in my own life, all of a sudden, just a couple of cases that come physically and emotionally kind of close to home, right in my town. And of course, these aren't the only murders. Murders are going on every week. And here they're dragging some new guy through the courthouse who's hiding his face, or not. And he's beat somebody up, or he's killed somebody, or they think he's killed somebody. One of the things that is getting to be so traumatic in our time are the number of crimes of violence against helpless people, children, and the elderly. I don't know what to think about a man who will beat up on an old woman. I just don't know. Who will come into a home, knock her to the floor, and not content just to knock her to the floor and take her television set or take this or take that. He has to beat the poor woman half to death before he goes. We have got in our world, in our country today, a legacy of violence that is absolutely beyond belief. I happened to tune in on USA Network, I think it was, one night, and here's this guy chasing a woman around her bedroom with a power auger drill. I mean, big little thing about that big around a drill like this. He's going to try to get her with the thing. I sit there and I just see this. It's horrible. And they mercifully flash away from him to the downstairs, and there's a guy downstairs listening to all the thrashing away, and suddenly the auger comes through the ceiling, dripping blood down below, and you know what's happened. This, apparently, from what I've heard, is one of the milder episodes in a new genre of movie called splatter movies. I guess it goes all the way back to the Texas Chainsaw Massacres, which the whole objective of it is to spread as much blood, gore, and what have you around as you possibly can. And you can flick across to, like I think last night, I flicked across to HBO. And here's this medical examiner looking at the body. I didn't know what the movie was. And the first thing I know, he takes a knife and goes right into the chest of this dead cadaver right on television, gets ready to start working his way down. I turn it off and get away from it. Sometimes these things print, in your mind, and they often can take weeks or months to get away from. Violence, blood, and gore are becoming so endemic in our society. To some small degree, I suppose we are becoming inured to it. Because if you were to bring my grandfather down into this world today, show him the newspapers, or take him to a movie, he would run screaming from the movie. I honestly believe. I don't think that he would not know where he was. Apart from technology, all that, which would be marvelous and so forth, the rest of this stuff of our world, I think he said, let me go back and sleep, and knowing my old grandfather, he said, let me wait for Jesus. Because he's the one who used to sit around and sing, Lord, build me just a cabin in the corner of glory land. That's all he wanted, was just a cabin. Well, violence, he said, has risen up into a rod of wickedness. Right inside of ourselves, our own chastisement is taking place from our own violence. This is what the sort of thing that Ezekiel is telling these people is taking place in their world. The only problem is Ezekiel is in vision. And we are going to see before all is said and done that Ezekiel is looking ahead. The pattern that he is seeing is a pattern not for that time, but a pattern for our time. Violence has risen up like a rod of wickedness. None of them shall remain, nor one of their multitude, not any of that crowd, or any of their possessions. There's not going to be any wailing for them. They're all going to be gone. Actually, the way it's worded in the NIV is that crowd shall not remain. There will be no wealth or anything of value of all the things that they have accumulated. About the richest people, it seems like, in this world nowadays are the drug dealers. And they're among the most violent among us. He says nothing is going to remain of that crowd. None of their wealth, none of their possessions. The time has come, the day draws near. Don't let the buyer rejoice or the seller mourn, for wrath is upon everybody. It isn't going to do you any good to be buyer, seller, or anything else. Wrath is upon everybody. For the seller shall not return to what sold, even if he was still alive. For the vision is touching the whole crowd, the whole multitude. Everybody is touched. And they shall not return, neither shall any strengthen himself in the iniquity of his life. He's not going to be able to just build up lawlessness. That's what iniquity means, the iniquity of his life. Paragraph actually should be in verse 14. They have blown the trumpet to make everything ready. Do you know what that means? The blowing of the trumpet in ancient times and in modern times is an alarm of war. You blow the trumpet to assemble. That's essentially what he's saying. They've blown the trumpet to make everything ready. They've blown assembly. What happened? No one shows up. No one goes forth to the battle. You imagine a poor guy who goes out there with his bugle and he's standing out in the middle of a parade ground, and normally he's prone to call assembly. And the next thing there's a rumble, and here comes people and tanks and trucks and all this stuff together, and the army begins to assemble to get ready to go to battle. The image is here. He's going to stand out there. He's going to blow assembly. He's going to hear the wind in the trees and sighing around the eaves of buildings. He's going to see leaves blowing across the parade ground. But no one is going to show up. Where are they? What's happened? A lot of them have been murdered because violence got much worse then than it has here yet. And that's the thing I think that probably when I said in the beginning of this series of all the prophets, Ezekiel is the one that makes my blood run cold, is the cold realization that even though I see the pattern repeating here, we're not there yet. And I realize how much worse it can be. They blow the trumpet to get everyone ready. Nobody goes to the battle, for my wrath is upon everyone, the whole multitude. The sword is without, pestilence and the famine within. He that is in the field shall die with the sword. He that's in the city, famine and pestilence shall devour him. Why didn't they come? Because they were all dead. That's why, when the trumpet was blown, no one came. No one showed up. But they that escape of them shall escape, and shall be on the mountains like the doves of the valley, everyone mourning for his iniquity. You know, the image is one of doves of the valley, suddenly up in the mountains in an unfamiliar environment, scattered all over the mountains, and with the little noises that doves make, cooing, and the sound which gives them the name mourning dove. He said all the rest of them are going to be like valley doves, scattered across the mountains, every one of them mourning for his iniquity. All hands shall be feeble, all knees weak like water. They shall gird themselves with sackcloth. Horror shall cover them, and shame shall be upon all faces, baldness upon all heads. All of the worst things that have been portrayed in the movies that people sometimes like to go see will come as cold reality. Because you see, the truth is that very little of what you see in these splatter movies would ever take place in the real world. Most of it is just it's just entertainment, theoretically. For some people, I suppose it is. But he says, all this stuff, you want an orgy? You're going to have an orgy. It's going to be an orgy of blood. You wanted to witness murders? You wanted to see blood splatter? You're going to see blood splatter. If that's what you want, I'm going to give it to you until you are so full of it that it's running out of your nose. You will finally have the blood orgy that you want. You want horror movies? I'm going to show you horror in real life. Living color, with full sound and full scent. The smell, the odor, and the stench. You get it all. You can even go up and put your hand in it. If you are of a mind to do it, it will be real. Horror shall cover them. Shame upon all faces. Baldness upon all their heads. Got a letter from a guy this last week who told me I wanted prayer for his mother. She's an old lady and not quite right in the head anymore. And all she does is sit around and pull her hair. And she says she has almost nothing left. Her mind has gone in such a way that she just tears and pulls at her hair. And the image here is of people who have come down to the place where they have nothing left. Their minds are gone. And all they can do is sit and tear at their hair. They shall cast their silver into the street. All their gold shall be removed. Their silver and their gold, well, it's just not going to buy them anything. It won't deliver them in the day of the wrath of the Lord. The beauty of his ornament, he set it in majesty. But they made the images of their abominations and their detestable things therein. Therefore have I set it far from them. All beauty is gone. All that stuff is away. I will give it to the hands of strangers for a prey, and to the wicked of the earth for a spoil, and they shall pollute it. My face will I turn from them, and they shall pollute my secret place. For the robber shall enter into it and defile it. You know, the secret place, the dark, all the temple, all that stuff is going to be destroyed, defiled, and ultimately, finally, torn down completely. Make a change, for the land is full of bloody crime. The city is full of violence. There are places right now where you read these words and you would get people with round eyes and solemnly nodding heads. There are a few places. There will be more. It will not be something tucked off in a ghetto or one corner of a city or the inner city or some desolate little place. It's going to be more and everywhere and touching lives everywhere before it is all finished. This is the thing, as I said, that makes my blood run cold. We here are on the same pattern these people were. We just haven't gone as far as yet. And we keep going. We are continuing in that direction. And our freedom, which we value and which we cherish, will be used as the instrument to tear us apart. But they would not hurt us. They would be the most wonderful thing in the world if we would just, as a people, know God. Know who He is. Know what He stands for. Believe in His standards. Believe in His judgment. And by His standards, I mean His law. He went through all this trouble through a people to tell us, year in, year out, how to worship Him, what He wants us to do, what He doesn't want us to do, how to treat our father and our mother, how to treat our children, how to treat servants, how to relate to our neighbors, how to take care of our animals, how to worship Him, when to worship Him, what imagery we ought to use. Nobody wants it. And here we are, with our beautiful freedom, tearing away at our bowels, because people will use it to burn our flag, which of all the things that people are doing with their freedoms is probably the least significant of itself. But it says so much about other things. Make a change when the land is full of bloody crimes and the city is full of violence. Wherefore I will bring the worst of the heathen, and they will possess their houses. I will make the pomp of the strong to cease, and their holy places shall be defiled. Destruction comes. They will look for peace, but there isn't any. Mischief shall come upon mischief. Rumor, already one rumor built on top of another rumor. Then they shall seek a vision of the prophet, but the law shall perish from the priest. Counsel from the ancient. Where are you going to find what's right? Nobody will have it. The law, he said, will perish from the priest. Advice, counsel, wisdom from the ancient. It's gone. There is no leadership. Isaiah makes the same complaint, that as these people slowly and systematically abandon God, wisdom, leadership, counsel, advice, law, all decay, rot, disappear. And when the people finally realize that something is wrong and they need to do something different, it's just not there. The king shall mourn, and the prince shall be clothed with desolation. The hands of the people of the land will be troubled. I will do to them after their way, and according to their deserts will I judge them. And they shall know that I am Yahweh. Not somebody else, that I am Yahweh. That's who I am, what I stand for, and what I won't stand for. Chapter 8, verse 1. It came to pass in the 6th year, and the 6th month, and the 5th day of the month. Now remember, we're in captivity when all this stuff is going on. Already. This is being dated from captivity. He said, as I sat in my house, and the elders of Judah sat before me. There's this thing I've mentioned before, and we'll be referring to it again throughout this whole series, about who these people are. He doesn't call them the elders of the house of Judah, of Israel, because that's not who they are. He's in captivity. He's in Babylon. And the people with him are not Israelites at large. They are Jews in particular. Israelites in a general sense, but Jews in particular. So he says, these are the elders of Judah sitting there before me. He said, the hand of the Lord fell upon me. And I beheld, and lo, a likeness, like the appearance of fire, from the appearance of his loins, even downward fire, from his loins upward, like the appearance of brightness, like the color of amber. This is the same one that he saw back in the original vision. And he put forth the form of a hand and took me by a lock of my head. And the Spirit lifted me up between the earth and the heaven and brought me in the visions of God to Jerusalem. Now, the one thing you must remember as you read through Ezekiel, that he is in vision. And consequently, trying to simply establish all this stuff, say, well, let's see, who is this person? Who is that person? Who are these people? And all these identities, it's like a dream. And you know how it is with dreams. Things change, people change, even identities change as you work your way through a scenario in a dream. You can be in one place, have never moved, and suddenly you're in a different place. All the physical laws are suspended. Sometimes even the laws of reason are suspended in a dream. So you're dealing with a vision from God. This is a very meaningful vision, but you must not look for your meaning in the traditional way that you would expect if a man is sitting talking to another man. He said he took me in visions of God to Jerusalem, to the door of the inner gate that looked toward the north, where was the seat of the image of jealousy, which provokes to jealousy. Now, what this is, I do not know. But I remember, since we are in vision, in one sense of the word, what it is may not be that significant in the sense of some factual, historical thing. In the reign of Manasseh, an image of Asherah was placed inside the temple. And Manasseh took it out. Somebody put it back. In the reign of Josiah, Josiah took it out again. This was inside, not outside at the gate where this particular one is. Actually, he says, to the door of the inner gate. And there was the seat of the image of jealousy that provoked the jealousy. The thing he said is there almost as though it were to provoke God. Asherah, of course, or Ashtaroth, all connected with the worship which we today call Easter. Behold the glory of the Lord of Israel that was there, according to the vision that I saw in the plain. Then he said to me, Son of man, lift up your eyes now to the way toward the north. So I looked north, and behold, north, at the gate of the altar, this image of jealousy at the entry, right at the entry of the place. Since we're in the temple, I mean, in a vision, we were at the very heart and core and center of the worship of Yahweh, and right there is an image of another god, or perhaps goddess, if it is that image of the Asherah or of Ishtar. He said furthermore unto me, Son of man, do you see what they do? Do you see the enormous, detestable thing that the house of Israel commits here? Now, this is the troubling thing about this thing, is Ezekiel's repeated use of this term, house of Israel. If that's all he ever used, you might conclude that he was using it in a generic sense, since Judah was all that was left of Israel in the here and now, that he is talking about the house of Judah and calling them the house of Israel. But he does not exclusively use this term. He uses both terms, and he uses them in rather a strange ways. Now, remember, we are in vision. You would not, in reality, there would be no one of the house of Israel present at this time. They were all gone captive. But we are not in reality. We are in vision. And these 70 elders that he's going to talk about cannot possibly be the Sanhedrin who were all Jews. Because the fact of the matter is, the Sanhedrin as an institution did not exist yet and would not until the Babylonian captivity and after. He said, do you see the great abomination that the house of Israel commits here, that I should go away from my sanctuary? Or the word sanctuary, by the way, in modern parlance simply would probably mean church. Do you see what the house of Israel has done to my religion? That I should go away from my church, or from my people, or from my religion. But turn, you're going to see even greater abomination. He brought me to the door of the court, and when I looked, behold, a hole in the wall. He said, Son of man, dig now in the wall. So I digged in the wall, and behold, a door. He said, go in, and behold, look at the wicked abominations that they do there. So I went in and saw. Remember, dream, vision, not reality. He says, I went in and saw, and behold, every form of creeping things, and abominable beasts, and all the idols of the house of Israel, portrayed on the wall round about. He wanders into what's supposed to be the temple, the inner court of the temple. And here are creeping things and detestable things and idols and murals on the wall of all kinds of corrupt things that he sees there. And there stood before them 70 men of the ancient, old men of the house of Israel. And in the midst of them stood Jaazaniah, the son of Shaphan, with every man his censer in his hand, and a thick cloud of incense went up. This man apparently was a real person, a real contemporary, as a matter of fact, of Ezekiel. And here he is in the middle of the vision with 70 of the ancient, not of the house of Judah, which will be mentioned later, but of the house of Israel. What are they doing? Well, they are inside, in vision, the sanctuary of God, doing all sorts of detestable things, men who should not be there if they were not priests, as a matter of fact. But anyway, it goes on to say, he said to me, Son of man, have you seen what the ancients of the house of Israel do in the dark? Every man in the chambers of his imagery? Oh, now there's a clue. Because you see, what he has really done is show him in vision what all these ancients are doing in the chambers of their minds, in their imagery, inside of themselves, in the dark, in little chambers. See, there's nothing in the temple itself to compare with this description of each of them with his little chamber. For they say, the Lord sees us not. The Lord, and Yahweh, has forsaken the earth. He doesn't even know what we are doing here. And you see, so much of what they are doing has nothing really to do with religion anyway. It has to do with their corrupt little practices and the way they want to live their lives. And the imagery is of him digging through a wall and opening a door and walking into their mind and seeing the kind of filth and corruption and idolatry that was there. He said to me, turn again, and you'll see greater abominations that they do. So he brought me to the door of the gate of the Lord's house, which was toward the north, and behold, there sat women weeping with Tammuz. Tammuz was the brother and husband of Ishtar. Brother, yes, and husband. There was an incestuous relationship between Ishtar and Tammuz. And in ancient mythology, Tammuz died every autumn. He withered away like a stick in the dry ground. And it was the tears of Ishtar who wet the ground with her tears, who watered him so he could rise up again fresh and new in the spring. He said, these women sat around here weeping for Tammuz. He said, have you seen this, O son of man? Turn again and you'll see more detestable things than these. It is interesting, nowadays, no one makes any connection with incest and incestuous practices that we have so common in our society now. And religion, do they? And yet in their origin, that's where it all started. Many much of it had to do with ancient religion, the worship of other gods and corrupt practices in these. And here he brings him into a vision, and here are women sitting around weeping for this God who made love to his sister in an incestuous relationship. This is not so far out for vision as being God's way of telling us today that this is one of the corrupt things in our society for which he is going to visit us. Then he said to me, have you seen this, son of man? Turn again. I'm going to show you greater, worse, more detestable things than these. He brought me into the inner court of the Lord's house, and behold, at the door of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, about 25 men with their backs toward the temple of God, and their faces toward the east, and they worship the sun toward the east. When the sun is in the east, the sun's rising. This was their sunrise service. And with worship of Ishtar all over the place, who has a problem with understanding that this was something of a set of Easter sunrise service? Oh, but that's just something pagans did. Generations, years, millennia ago, modern man would never do a foolish thing like that, would he? Well, you can go and see this. You can see it next spring. At Easter time, you can trot yourself right out to any number of hilltops and find churches by the dozen out there not worshiping. They don't think they're worshiping the sun in its rising. But they're all turned toward the sun. And they think that it's symbolic of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who himself is the Son, S-U-N, of righteousness.
He said, have you seen this, son of man? Do you think this is a trivial thing? That the house of Judah, it's almost as though the 25 men over here are elders of the house of Judah, funnily enough, worshiping the sun in its rising, not of the house of Israel. But the other 70 men of the house of Israel. I don't want to put too much weight on this. I just want us to file it away in our memory as we work our way through Ezekiel. You see, is this a light thing that the house of Judah commits, abominations that they commit here? They have filled the land with violence. They have returned to provoke me to anger. And lo, they put the branch to the nose. Nobody knows really what that means, a twig. They take a little twig and they put it to their nose. He said, therefore I will deal in fury. My eye shall not spare, neither will I have pity. And though they cry in my ears with a loud voice, yet I will not hear them. But I guess we'll have to wait until another sermon on Ezekiel to see what happens in the next chapter.